Hello, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. Boirun, as we say in the Turkish Latino custom. It's so wonderful to have you all with us today, this afternoon, in New York time, 5 p.m., Seattle time, 2 p.m. Western time. We're so happy to have you for this wonderful Sephardic rabbinical panel in honor and in memory of Rabbi Hacham Bashi, Dr. Nissim Ovadia, Zichron Levracha, former Sephardic Chief Rabbi of the United States. We're so honored and privileged to have so many wonderful Chachamim with us today, talking about what makes a Sephardic leader, Sephardic models for community and rabbinic leadership for the 21st century. The way this panel is going to work, I'll ask some intro questions for all our Chachamim, and then we will open up the floor to questions from you all as well. We just ask if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. It's my pleasure to first introduce our four panelists. First, we have over here Rabbi Moises Chicurel, who is the Chief Sephardic Rabbi of the Sephardic Community of Mexico City. We're so wonderful to have him here today. Next, we have Rabbi Daniel Bouskila, the International Director of the Sephardic Educational Center. Third, we have Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé, the Executive Director of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America. And lastly, and of course, certainly not least, Rabbi Daniel Hadar, the spiritual leader and rabbi of Congregation Temple Moses in Miami. Hachamim, thank you all so much for being here today.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
So we'll start it up.
Thank you.
So we're going to open up the floor. We'll start with Rabbi Hadar, and we'll open it up also questions for everybody else. So this program, as I mentioned, is in honor of Chacham Bashi Nissim Ovadia, a wonderful leader who many in our community actually don't know and don't really recognize as someone we really should look at because he's just not well known. Can you maybe describe a little bit about his history and his heritage for what you know, and why today we're really talking about him as a model for Sephardic community leadership?
Absolutely. First of all, it's an honor to be here with these other Hachamim, wonderful, wonderful Hachamim with us today, and great leaders for our community. I think all of us have taken inspiration from the past generations, and he was one of the greats. It's one of those situations where, as you mentioned, I think it's incredible in our community how much we've lost in terms of our knowledge. So I'll give a bit of a background to him with respect to where I want to share a few things, and then I'm going to let the other rabbis share as well a lot more about his background, because he lived an incredible life. His life spanned from Edirne in Turkey all the way to the United States in the 1940s. He lived a life where he grew up, and like many of the Sephardic Jews at the time, studied under the Alliance, where he learned and expanded himself as a young adult, and as well as through his Torah studies. For many that may not know, the Alliance back in the day was a conglomerate. This is worth another very long discussion at some point, but an educational system meant for a community, for our Sephardic community, where they felt that it was incredibly lacking. And the problem with Alliance was that it was not Torah based. It was a very secular education, but it did a lot in terms of helping the people grow. So Rabbi Ovadia started there, but then as well supplemented with his own Torah learning. Now, he has a fascinating story as to how he led the communities after that in the pre-war Europe, and how he survived there, which I'm going to let the other rabbis jump into because it's a long and fascinating story. I want to fast forward personally to where it's relevant to today. He eventually made his way to America when he felt he tried to stay to the last possible moment to be mechazek the kahal, to strengthen the kahal in France. It was his stop before the war. But when it became impossible and he knew he would be singled out, he left, and he had an opportunity to get to America. And I want to fast forward to there because I think that's where I'd like to share a few words about him and how he impacted my life in reading about his life. When he came to America, he had nothing because he just arrived here like many immigrants. But he immediately went to work in finding a way to engage the Sephardic community. And he eventually started an organization after a very short time that was aimed at not starting his own congregation, but instead organizing the Sephardic community together. And in that way, he'd hoped that he would be able to rally the Sephardic Jews for greater purposes as one unified front. And very interesting, he talks about and writes about how he did not want to blend with the Ashkenazim at the time. He correctly and very astutely recognized that and said that when it was going to be the time for the Jewish people to come together in a state of Israel, we would come together as a people there. But that while we are not there, it behooves us to recognize our own heritage, explore that, and celebrate that, because that's where strength and learning is going to come from. So he did push for a Sephardic alliance specifically. And he did this successfully, and he got supporters to support this. And his crowning achievement came at a time right before his passing. He passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And that happened immediately after he created an amazing 1,500 person convention in 1948, I believe it was, which is mind-blowing for the time, of bringing the Sephardic Jews together. Now, I read about this years ago, and a couple things struck me about that, and I want to just zoom on to there, if that's okay, Ethan. Now, I shared a little bit about him, or do you want to go to the next question first? But I wanted to kind of share a couple thoughts on leadership there.
Maybe one of the two Chachamim want to add additional comment, and then we'll jump back to you, if that's okay.
Excellent.
Perfect. So Rabbi Bouskila, Rabbi Chicurel, Rabbi Nissim, whoever would like to add in some info or some inputs.
I mean, I was most intrigued by something that I've felt is still the most glaring element that's missing in North America for the Sephardic Jewish community. We have great organizations, we have beautiful synagogues. We can speak a little bit later about his viewpoint regarding how synagogues, he wrote in a very beautiful position paper about Sephardic Judaism, how Sephardic synagogues were not united, and one synagogue played the organ on Shabbat, others didn't. There were all sorts of divergent opinions about what to do, and there was a lack of unity in the Sephardic community. But I've always felt, my personal bias is that lay-led organizations are wonderful, and we have many such organizations. What's been the power base of, if we want to take the Ashkenazi world in orthodoxy, conservative, and reform, is the fact that every single one of those denominations or versions of Judaism have at their core a training seminary in North America to produce spiritual leaders. Sephardim do not. You know, Yeshiva University for the modern Orthodox community, as we know, in addition to Yeshiva University, there are many other yeshivot, Lakewood, Ner Yisrael, etc., all sorts of even smaller rabbinical yeshivot. But let's take with Yeshiva University as being the modern Orthodox, professionalized rabbinical school where the student enters with a bachelor's degree and comes out with rabbinical ordination, 4 years, training as part of a professional as well as a very, very serious halachic learning. In the conservative and reform movements as well, they have Jewish Theological Seminary, Hebrew Union College. These serve sort of, it sends a spiritual message to their community that training rabbinical leadership, spiritual leadership for their future of their community is important. And I know that Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé wrote that he wanted to establish a training center, a rabbinical seminary. This is perhaps the most unfortunate part of his early passing, is that there was never such a seminary established, because we've always had to borrow. Our communities, and we can go into this, how our communities have had to borrow from other movements, denominations. This is a problem that continues to this very day. We've had to come to terms with particular rabbis that may or may not fit the community, but there was no other choice. And it's unfortunate. And I think that was an incredible vision of his. If I scanned the paper that he wrote about Sephardic, his vision for Sephardic Judaism, if I had to fish out one piece that I would love to convince 10 donors to put their money in and create, it would be to create a rabbinical seminary that is Sephardic for North America. I love Israel. I'm a big Zionist. My organization, the Sephardic Educational Center, is located in the old city of Jerusalem. But I really do believe that a rabbi who's going to serve in North America is best trained in North America to deal with the type of community issues that we deal with. You go away to Israel for 4 years, you're going to come back. It's just not the same. This is one of the many probably unfortunate features of his passing so young, but I think this is the one that most attracted and appealed to me.
Rabbi Chicurel, you want to add some thoughts?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ethan. Thank you for inviting me to join this awesome panel. And I would like to add that some of the thoughts that I had the chance to read from Rabbi Nissim Obadia was that he was aware that in his times we were already starting a new challenge in the history of our people and in the history of the Sephardic heritage. And he was asking that rabbis in his time were spent most of their times in halachic matters, in terms of law, in terms of what was forbidden and what was allowed. And I had the feeling, and I want to ask my fellow rabbis here in the panel, how we could answer to those questions in our times, because we are still in these changing moments when we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a leader? And in particular, what does it mean to be a Sephardic leader? And because leading, it's moving from a place towards another place, from a point to another point, a specific goal. So he was aware of many things in his time that everybody was giving for granted. And these kind of leaders that I think we do lack in our times, were aware that we have a responsibility as leaders, and we have a responsibility as members of this heritage, the Sephardic heritage, and we have to ask ourselves how and where to lead our congregations, our communities, and as Rabbi Bouskila were telling us, and Rabbi Hadar was saying, we must get reunited now that we have the state of Israel, now that the state of Israel is it's a reality. We have to ask ourselves, what are the biggest questions of our time, and getting all those questions answered just as he answered the biggest questions of his time. And that's how we could be leading our congregations, our communities, truly to the ultimate goal, which is the true Geulah of the Jewish people, to get all united, to be one nation, each and every one of us with their own heritage, but straighten the heritage of each and every one of our communities, and in particular from the Sephardic heritage, not being blended with the whole of the heritage that we are part of as the Jewish people, but strengthen our identity, and with the proud of having our particular identity being positive parts of a new building in our nation. So that's what I would like to ask my fellow Rabbanim here. How do you think that the teachings of Rabbi Ovadia could help us to lead our congregations in our time?
This is a perfect transition, by the way. Thank you so much, Chacham, to Rabbi Hadar's point about modern readership. And what I think we'll do, we'll go to Rabbi Hadar, then straight to Rabbi Nissim, so he can get some words in as well, because I think he has a lot of good inputs on this as well. So Rabbi Hadar, please.
I missed that last thing you said, Ethan.
I said, I think this transitions perfectly to what you were going to speak about modern leadership. So maybe you want to take a few moments to speak to that, and then we'll go to Rabbi Nissim to have some inputs as well.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So what I was going to say is, what really struck me many years ago when I read that was that, you know, there's two questions. You know, there's, what does Sephardic leadership mean? Does that mean leading our own respective Sephardic communities? Or does it mean, how do we have leadership for the entire Sephardic community? One of the interesting things that Sephardic Jews, and like everything in life, our strength is our weakness. So our strength is that we have a tremendous pride in our heritage, tremendous. But it's also weakness, because all of us have such pride that, you know, the Persian community says, the Persians, Syrians, Syrian, Moroccans, Turkish, right? Everyone wants to really do their heritage. So one of the things that really struck me was that Rabbi Ovadia Nissim, what he did was bring the communities together for a forward-looking concept for all of the Sephardic Jews in the Galut. And what was very interesting to me was Hacham Yaakov Kassin, who is the chief rabbi of the Syrian community, was extremely behind this back in those days, and how much that has changed. In today's world, it's very interesting because we've had a lot of growth in the Sephardic community, but the growth has come for each group in and of their own group, as opposed to group as a larger Sephardic community, which goes to Rabbi Bouskila's interesting point, which is that we don't have a training center for Sephardic Chachamim, as it were. To some degree, we don't. It's difficult for us to get together as one large group, because each group has its own path and thoughts, what have you. What was very striking to me was that they were able to do this, especially back then, to create. They called it, seemingly to some degree, they looked at it as like the Sanhedrin, meaning getting together all the great leaders of the communities then. And that's an interesting question in Sephardic leadership in today's world. Are we at a point that we can get together as one large group, or have we grown enough in our respective groups to just talk about Sephardic leadership within those groups? That's a very interesting question to me, and where we put our time and efforts, and whether or not there's an interest from all the groups getting together, because each group has their own derech, in essence, their own way and their own strengths. So I'll push that back to the other Chachamim in just a moment. And one last thing I'm going to mention, so I don't take up too much time here, is that the other thing about Rabbi Ovadia was that he was very, very Sephardic, and this goes to Sephardic leadership, which all of us, I think, agree on very, very much. The Sephardic leaders, the Sephardic rabbi, is a Renaissance man. One of the things that really we've always had as Sephardic Jews is that we don't come at it from a one-sided perspective. We have a very multifaceted perspective, because we study the world. and we're engaged with the world. We're not hidden from the world. We don't run away from the world. And he was an incredibly learned individual. And he talks about that as well in some of his writings and some things noted about him. But I think that when you talk about Sephardic leadership, and I'll close with this, it's also about the way that we are engaging the world. And the way that we do that is from a multifaceted background, which we believe as leaders allows us to have a better way of connecting to our communities and a better way of seeing and understanding what's the right path forward.
Thank you, Ethan. And I just, the first words I want to say is that, you know, the fact that we're able to get together like this with all of you, dear rabbis to me, so dear, all of you. So it's you know, it's just incredible for me to be able to sit in these panels. It's humbling, and at the same time, it feels, you know, I feel such a brotherly connection with all of you. And so thank you for allowing me to sit with you. So I want to tell you just quickly, because maybe the audience wants to know a little bit more of Rabbi Ovadia, Nissim Ovadia. I came to know the history of Nissim Ovadia maybe some 25 years ago. And then studying with a dear friend, Joseph Mosseri in New York, he mentioned to me, oh, he was the chief rabbi of the Sephardim in the United States. I said, what are you talking about? So, you know, doing that led me into a lot of other research about the rabbi and finding out about his history. First, one thing that we were talking just a little while ago with Rabbi Hadar, that this history is yesterday. It's not something that happened 1,000 years ago, not even 100 years ago. And it's something that's forgotten so quickly by us. And I think that that's something that, you know, it's troubling to us that we didn't get this full history and tradition about something so important that happened here. And let me run through it very, very quickly. Rabbi Nissim Ovadia is born in 1888 in Andrinople. Andrinople was a super Jewish community. It wasn't a small, it was something close to Salonika, something close to Constantinople, Istanbul. You know, a huge amount of Jewish people there. He grows up, is educated by his uncle Nissim Papo, and well, he's a little bit trained, loses his father at the age of 13. He's got two younger sisters. Still, the mother decides, Mesirut Nefesh, absolute Mesirut Nefesh, to send him off to yeshiva because she wants him to be this, you know, well-rounded, educated Talmid, you know, Talmid Hacham. The things that are said about him at such a young age, good etiquette, well-behaved, you know, the thinking, the common sense thinking that these individuals, you know, like Nissim Ovadia had. His teachers are the greatest rabbis of the early part of the 20th century. Rabbi Ben Zion Hayuziel, Rabbi Ben Zion Cuenca. Those are some of his teachers. And then he becomes the rabbi under Michael Papo in the city of Vienna. Vienna, there was a Sephardic community in Vienna. This is a discovery. And then 10 years later, this was in 1913, I believe, 1913 that he came to Vienna. 1923 becomes the chief rabbi of that community that had some 500, some 400 members. Leads the community, brings the community to an unbelievable change, which it's the beginning of all these new organizations, the Zionist World Organization, which the Sephardim began to pick up that they weren't fully being paid attention to. And they became him amongst the Sephardim that were the leaders of the time. They became very uncomfortable that the World Zionist Organization was not paying attention to the thinking of the Sephardim as far as Zionism is concerned. So they began to develop their own organizations in order to bring this up to the World Zionist Organizations. There were two major conferences that he was the leader of. He formed together with, the first time it's maybe some 2-3 dozen communities that came together I believe it was in Vienna, the first one, and the second one was in 1937, which was in Amsterdam. And it's an unbelievable thing that you had, according to the records that we see, 67 communities, Sephardic communities, come together and discussing all Sephardic matters, Jewish matters, creating some type of, the first Sephardic Federation. I mean, this is an unbelievable. You understand that there's no internet, there's hardly phones in those days when these people are putting this together, and so they're leaders of communities, and he's the main motor and the main mover of all of this movement that was created. Unfortunately, it's 1937, so we know what happened right after. Many of these communities get wiped out during the war by the Nazis in Ashkenazi. So the loss is incredible. As Rabbi Bouskila mentioned, one of their dreams was to build a major academy, a yeshiva, for the Sephardim to be fully educated with authentic Sephardic teachings. And that was one of the great, great losses. Rabbi Ovadia, just to finish some of the history, very short history that I'm telling you, Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé was the chief rabbi of Vienna. When things began to become a little bit ugly in Austria, 1929, the community begins to fall apart. They understood that things were becoming very, very anti-Semitic. So he resettled in France, in Paris. He became the chief rabbi of the community in Paris, organized the community in Paris, which was very unorganized, as Rabbi Bouskila mentioned, and Rabbi Hadar mentioned, all the divisions in between the different smaller cities. One is from Izmir, the other one is from Constantinople, and the other one. And so he is able to put them all together. And he says, this is the one thing, this is our Achilles, right? This is our weakness over here that we need to repair. By the way, so exactly that happens again to him in 1940, when the Nazis come to France. He was very, very open about what the Nazis were all about, and so they advised him, leave as soon as you can because they're going to come after you. Absolutely. He ran first to Lisbon, to Portugal, and he stayed there for about a year until he was able to get a visa into the United States, because the family of his wife, they were already here in the United States. They secured the visa for him, and so the family came here. Within a few months, he's organizing the Central Sephardic Community in New York in the United States, and he becomes the chief rabbi and the leader of this movement. And it's, as Rabbi Hadar mentioned, it wasn't only that that the Sephardim, the Spanish-speaking Sephardim got together on this, but it was all of the communities, any community that was understood to be Sephardi, the Syrian communities, the Egyptian community, everybody came together. He's able to pull this together, Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé. And unfortunately, a year later, he has a massive heart attack and he passes. And this is such a great loss. But I think that in a sense, our obligation is here to understand the history and to really analyze an individual that is able to do this, is able to fall and recover, just to make a final point here, maybe to lead into the thought that Rabbi Chicurel was talking about. He reminds me of the life of Don Isaac Abravanel, who I also love so much because of his teachings, that I consider these men my teachers. Don Isaac Abravanel, he's first in Portugal, and the king dies, and he has to escape, and he ends up in Spain, and he's absolutely poor, and he's lost everything, and very soon again he gets up and he's one of the leading individuals of the Jewish community in Spain. And then the Jews get expelled from Spain, and he loses everything, and he ends up in Naples. And again, he's with kings, and he rises again to the top. So there's something about this type of individuals that they're really teaching us so many, many things. And that's why I think their history is so important that we should look at. These are individuals that did incredible things. Here's Nissim Elnecavé, short He was born in 1888, passed away in 1942. Very short life in a sense, and there's an unbelievable history, and there's a history to be discovered because all that we're able to find are short books, and so there is a lot more to be learned from this individual. For us, specifically the Ladino community, that we do have amazing teachers and amazing leaders, and it's our obligation to learn from them and to see that they were able to do incredible things. They were able to stand up and say, hey, somebody needs to recognize our voice too. Here we are with the Sephardim. The state of Israel is being talked about. You will not leave us out. That was a statement. I think rather strong statement.
I think it was beautifully said, Chacham. Really wonderful summary of his life and comments on all the wonderful impact. Hazaku Baruch, really beautiful. I want to pull this a little bit forward now between the four Chachamim and speak about how we can use his legacy to inform our modern Sephardic communities, right? What can we pull from him? And more importantly, what do we need to do today for the 21st century to really model what it means to be Sephardic leader, both rabbinic and communal, right? Because there are many different elements. So whoever would like to add in some points there, please welcome them. And then after that, we're going to take some questions from the audience.
You know, I think one of the important things that we all have to face, it's a reality that we have to face, is that very, very unfortunately, when we talk about Chacham Nissim Elnecavé or Chacham Uziel or all of these great Chachamim, you know, if we were living 1920 or 1940, and we were talking about the Chachamim that are in our various countries, in our various lands, the countries that we lived in, the countries that we left, and the rabbis that came mostly to Israel, maybe a few came like he did to Chacham Nissim Elnecavé, came to the United States. Most of them, as we know, went to Israel. There were still, as we would say, you know, in Hebrew, Chachamim b'shefa. There were, you know, thank God we were blessed to have these, you know, leaders present and alive. We no longer have those kinds of leaders, and we're never going to have those leaders again. They're not around. That world is a vanished world. It's gone. That which remains are their ideas, their books, their legacy, those who could tell their stories, the way my dear friend Rabbi Nissim just told this story. That's what's incumbent upon our generation, is to tell the stories of these Chachamim, but also to try to fish something out deeper than just their stories. Sephardim are wonderful storytellers, and we love to sit around and tell stories. It's a great part of our culture. But one of the things that I think, when you ask Ethan the question about, you know, for modern leadership, whether it's rabbinic or lay leadership, many people often ask a question that's an inconvenient truth. Why have so many Sephardim left the fold of Sephardic Judaism and sought their spirituality elsewhere? Why have they gone to various other types of synagogues, movements, denominations, organizations? Why have they left what the comfort zone of what their parents or grandparents were about? So I think here we really need to do a soul searching, and it does relate to, you know, what does it mean to be a leader in the 21st century in the absence of those great Chachamim being present, when all that's left are their books, their legacy, and their teachings. What do we draw out from it? And I think what many people are thirsty for and are looking for is not just the Sephardic heritage in terms of its folklore and its culture, but what does it mean ideologically in the 21st century from a perspective of philosophy or thinking to be a Sephardic Jew? Is there an ideology behind all of these Chachamim, or they simply just represent different minhagim? I could fantasize about creating a rabbinical school, but then if somebody dropped us $25 million and said, go ahead, we'd celebrate that night, and the next morning, all the disputes would begin. What is the character of that school? What is Sephardic? Who is Sephardic? Who's in, who's out? Or are we beyond that in the 21st century? And could we speak of a pan-Sephardic Judaism, where we could say non-Ashkenazi Judaism? Anybody who is Sephardi, or whatever they call it, Dota Mizrach, does everybody have a seat at that table? Are we a united Sephardic community? And beyond the different customs and minhagim of what we dip when and what we eat and how we cook and bake and how we pronounce and what tune we're going to sing the slichot to, those are all wonderful pieces of our culture. But the young people that are leaving us in great numbers are leaving because Chabad has an ideology. Modern Orthodoxy has an ideology. Reform Judaism has an ideology. And they will always come back to us and say, your synagogue, beyond the fact that it represents the minhag of Turkey or of Syria or of Morocco, what is your philosophy as vis-a-vis X, Y, or Z? Many subjects that young people have questions about. There are answers to those questions in the writings of Rabbi Uziel, in the writings of Rabbi Matthias. It doesn't matter what Sephardic land do they come from. There are many, many answers to some of the contemporary issues that we're dealing with are found in those writings. We know that many of those Sephardic rabbis, when it came to their either halachic writings or their philosophic writings, were very much ahead of their time. When you're reading Rabbi Uziel's writings from the 1930s, he sounds more modern than many Sephardic rabbis who just posted a blog on the internet, if they even would do that today, some of them, right? My point being is that we need, I think, to do a better job of describing the philosophy of Sephardic Judaism. Many are going to be sitting in the audience. One of the follow-up questions will be, okay, what is the philosophy? I have ideas about it. Others may have different ideas about it, and that's great. What we need to do is to get all of our leaders together, rabbinic and lay, and come up with sort of a mission statement about here is what we think Sephardic Judaism is, so that those young people who leave us, not because they don't like the tunes in the synagogue, not because they don't like the flavors of what we're cooking for Rosh Hashanah. That's not why they're leaving. They're always going to love that. They're always going to yearn to sing Anenu on Yom Kippur in the Sephardic style. They're always want to have the foods that they're accustomed to, but they're going to say, the synagogue itself didn't do it for me, because in the other synagogue, the rabbi has a particular philosophical worldview. I think Rabbi Uziel had a philosophical worldview. I think Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé certainly had a philosophical worldview. I almost see him as like the Rabbi Uziel of the United States for the short time that he was here. He had that vision in mind. We need to draw out that vision because those rabbis are gone. But they did leave us a way of thinking and about looking at life, about confronting modernity. And those, I think, are the questions that even people of your generation are thirsty for answers for. In many of my conversations I've had with you about what's going on in our world right now. Is there a Sephardic response to what's going on in our country, what's going on in Israel, the political situation? Do the Sephardic rabbis and communities have what to say about that? Or are we just busy discussing what, how we're going to prepare the Seder plate for Rosh Hashanah, and whether we use pomegranates or whether we use black-eyed peas or etc. Those are folk traditions. They're fantastic. But young people want more than that, and that's what I think we need to provide as leaders.
Thank you so much, Chacham. I'm going to jump back very quickly just to Rabbi Hadar, because I know he has to run in a few moments. But after that, we're going to open up questions to the audience and then get some inputs from Rabbi Chicurel as well. Rabbi Hadar, B'chamon.
Thank you, Ethan. I just wanted to jump in real quick as I do have another event I have to step out to. But Rabbi Bouskila, I think, is hitting on something that's exactly correct. That's a core thought, which is, what is the ideology? So I'm just going to share with you from our perspective here in Miami what I've tried to do to specifically hit that in a very real fashion. So it's maybe serve as an idea to talk more about. But I've said to our community a lot, and it just came up last week in the parasha as well, that what is it that we stand for? Right. And what I talk a lot about here is that many times, at least 10 times in the Torah, it talks about the mitzvah of simcha, of joy. And to me, Sephardic Judaism is, and no one talks about that. You won't hear this from the Ashkenazi, you won't hear this from other groups. I talk constantly that there is a mitzvah of simcha. In other words, there are many mitzvot that it's mentioned once, and people talk about this ad nauseum, but it's mentioned 10 times, and we don't talk about it. So I say that is what we represent, meaning you see it within our people. When our people get together, they are a happy people. It's very difficult to get our people together, but when we do get them together, there's a great joy, and everybody who comes to visit touches that and feels that and wants more of that, because we're living a Sephardic Judaism, meaning joy comes from a certain way that's an amalgam of all the things we do together. It's the way we do our foods, even though those are silly, but it's, if you take it all together, the language, the foods, the disposition, the discussion of how we discuss our Torah, etc. So what I've tried to do is to hone in on that particular concept and say that we bring that mitzvah to the Jewish people in a very serious way. And we've tried to create that environment that can be touched and felt. I think when a person goes to, let's say, Chabad or to other communities, etc., the feedback I get from them is that, it just felt very Jewish or whatever. They have a feeling. It's not a logical analysis. It's a feeling. So here, the feeling based on a logical concept of simcha and a mitzvah of simcha, which goes to the core of the Sephardic worldview, which has to do with seeing the whole world. We didn't grow up in ghettos. We didn't live in ghettos. We lived a much fuller life, and that plays out in the way we are. And that's, by the way, our challenge too. Because we are so broad, it's hard for us to absolutely hammer home an ideology, because we're constantly developing, and we're constantly open, and we're constantly discussing new developments, and that is part of us as well. But in a real fashion, I've tried to hone in on that one particular concept, so that when people come here, they have a certain way. I'd love to hear the responses to that, but I'm going to have to go in just a few moments. But thank you, everybody, for having me. What a beautiful group and gathering today, and for all the Hamim. It's an honor, a pleasure every time.
Thank you so much, Chacham. I want to jump into a few questions from the audience now that I think are really relevant questions for today and for the Chachamim. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. We love to hear from you. So first up over here, I think is a wonderful question. Can maybe the Chachamim, can you maybe speak to some examples of Sephardic female leadership? You know, often we speak a lot about the wonderful rabbis, Sephardic rabbis who've done so much in the communal leaders, but we often don't hear about some of the female leaders and how they've been really active in our community. So maybe if either Rabbi Nissim or Rabbi Chicurel, if you want to comment on that. Rabbi Chicurel, please.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I just wanted to add before that we must stress that not only the simcha, not only the joy of making mitzvot and being a part of the Jewish people is something that distinguishes us from other streams in Judaism, but also that we are capable of integrating the knowledge and the philosophy of our times. If you will ask somebody what's the importance, let's say, of Maimonides, Rambam, or any of the biggest Chachamim and also leader women in the history of the Sephardic world, that they were able to integrate with the fashion of their times. I mean, not the fashion from a fashionable point of view, but they were men of their time. And something that Am Israel is lacking right now, and it's something that the Sephardic world can contribute greatly to the whole of Am Israel, is that we are mainly disintegrated and we are mainly fragmented from the inside. We live in times when everybody, it's like, I am this particular kind of Jew. And if as Sephardim, we have something to contribute, is that we are integrating our times to the Jewish life, and we are integrating the Jewish thoughts and the Jewish wisdom to our times. So that's something that all of the leaders of the Sephardic communities all over the history were doing, from, if you will call him a Sephardic leader, from Rab Sadia Gaon till the days of Rabbi Obadia. And that's something that, addressing the question of Rabbi Bouskila, it's something that truly distinguishes us from other streams in Judaism. So leading our communities to the Geulah of Israel, we must integrate wisdom, integrate, you know, in the Sephardic communities everywhere, not only in Turkey, but in London, not everywhere, also in the United States. Before the past century, there were no such things as Orthodox or modern Orthodox or Reform or whatever. We were only Jews. We were only Judeos. That's what I'm stressing here. And we have that strength. We have the strength of making all together, being all together. And even when most of our members here, for instance, in the Sephardic community here in Mexico, they are not that observant, but they feel Jewish, and they feel that they belong to the Jewish community, to the Sephardic community, and they feel that they are part of this broader meaning of being part of Israel. And that's the contribution that we can make, and that we can make that answering for the important questions of our time. And the most important question of our times, from my point of view, is how we are going to reintegrate the Jewish people. And we, as Sephardim, we know how to do that. And that's the contribution I think that we could make for the whole Jewish people. And addressing the question of women leadership, anybody here knows who was Doña Gracia? Doña Gracia Nasi. She was the starter of the Zionism in the 17th century. So I don't know if any of my fellow rabbis want to add something about that, but we do have a lot of women leadership inside the Sephardic heritage.
If I may, I could speak about contemporary Sephardic leadership in terms of women. So unfortunately, here in the United States, in North America, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know of any significant Sephardic leadership initiative for women, for Sephardic women, that really exists. I mean, there are wonderful, women who are presidents or heads of organizations. We have many, many wonderful women, female leaders who are members of my board, on my executive board of the Sephardic Educational Center, of the synagogues that I've been affiliated with. They've all had, some have had women presidents, and it's wonderful. But I can say that in the last 3 years, and Chacham Nissim knows this because he's met some of these women at our Metifta program that we do for the rabbis in the summer. The Sephardic Educational Center is very proud to have helped launch a women's Bet Midrash, a Sephardic women's Bet Midrash in Jerusalem in the Old City called Arevot. We helped establish it about 3 years ago. They have a regular full program of study. These are not, young seminary girls. These are professionals. These are women who are all, some have been members of Knesset, some are attorneys, doctors, housewives, educators, the full gamut. They're all Sephardi, Dota Mizrach, from various backgrounds, and they want to reclaim their tradition. They want to reclaim the Sephardic tradition that they felt has been taken away from them paradoxically in Israel. And so they meet on a regular basis. When I'm in Israel, I have the privilege of teaching them in person. When I'm not, Zoom, I did not discover due to coronavirus, but I've been using Zoom for about 3 years because I teach this women's Bet Midrash Arevot once every 2 weeks, like this on Zoom since 2017. I have a regular shiur with them, including this past Sunday. I did a pre-Rosh Hashanah shiur with about 30 women that were on Zoom from all over the place in Israel. Activists, social activists, studying halakha. They're going to engage in a program that's going to include Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, who's going to be teaching them. He's very, very active, involved with that as well. So it is happening. It's happening in Israel. I would love to see, and I've told them, I've spoken to them about wanting to create a branch of that here for North America, because I think it's very needed. And one time, maybe we could devote a panel to discussing the fact that when you look at the writings of Rav Uziel, Rav Masas, Rav Ovadia Yosef, vis-a-vis women's roles in synagogue, the place of women in synagogue, you'll find things very, very surprising. You'll find the so-called modern Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbis who say it's absolutely prohibited for a woman to read Megillat Esther unless she's in a women's only minyan and this and that and all sorts of hagbalot, whereas Rav Ovadia Yosef writes very clearly that a woman could read a Megillah for men and women, and recite the bracha and be motzi and fulfill their obligation. He wrote it very clearly. It's a long paper, and he said it has nothing to do with a woman's voice and kol isha. Certainly when it came to voting in the Yishuv, the very famous women's suffrage issue that existed in the Yishuv in Palestine in the 1920s, Rav Kook, the famous rabbi, opposed the right of women to vote. I'm not talking about in synagogue. I'm talking about in municipal elections. Rabbi Uziel was absolutely in favor of it. If you read his writings, it almost sounds feminist in terms of the way he defends the right of women to vote and their intellect and so on. Rav Masas, of course, has a lot about this, about women praying in the synagogue. We can go on and on. There's a lot to be said. Sometimes it's conveniently kind of, shoved under the carpet by certain rabbis because it may threaten what they do or don't do, and they don't want to be called reformed. Even some people took Rav Masas's writings and they censored them when they reprinted it. They printed new versions and they expunged all of these statements that he made, permitting women to have their own minyan and to read the Torah and so on and so forth. His own grandson was shocked by the fact that the printers took it upon themselves, the chutzpah, to censor the writings of his own grandfather. I spoke to the grandson when I was in Israel. He was in part of our program. So there's a lot to be said about women, and I think it's a crucial, important question. We're in the 21st century, and we don't need to imitate other denominations. We have plenty from within our tradition that was very proactive about the voice of women and the importance of women in the community.
Thank you so much, Chacham. I want to jump to another one or two questions here that I think are really relevant. Maybe Rabbi Nissim, if you want to jump in here. Is Sephardic defined in opposition to Ashkenazi? As in, is everything that isn't Ashkenazi automatically Sephardic? And is that a problematic way to think about it?
Well, I probably I would not say it that way. I'd say that we have a clear tradition that that has, even by ourselves, we haven't realized sometimes the tradition that we carry. I'll tell you a very quick story. Young, growing up in a very Turkish community, beautiful Mexico City, Rabbi Chicurel, has the you know, that warmth of that community, you know. So I grew up in that community, and at the age of 12, I went to Ashkenazi yeshiva. And in my mind, when I came to the Ashkenazi yeshiva, whatever they were doing was Jewish, was the way things were supposed to be. So, you know, as a young kid, I go through a major culture clash. I'm eating gefilte fish, you understand. So, right, so I go through a major culture clash. And when I went back to Mexico, every time I was in school in yeshiva here in the United States, and every time I got all the yeshivot or Ashkenaziot here, at the time that's what they were. And every time I had a chance to go back to Mexico, I would clash again, but this time I would clash with my community. How come they're not doing what I'm learning, the things that I'm eating, digesting, you know, what I'm being nourished? I'll say it, you know, I'm not Dosamak. I'm learning Yiddishkeit, but I'm not looking at my upbringing as necessarily something that was traditional, you know, as an observant upbringing, because I'm assuming that now what I'm doing is observance. But when I went to yeshiva in Israel, I went to a Sephardic yeshiva led by rabbis who are of Syrian background, and Rabbi Shlomo Kassin. And very, very soon, I found myself learning, you know, in a very different environment, very, very exciting way of learning for me. I was able to learn Hebrew, and I was able to all of a sudden use the books and understand the books that I had not been able to understand for so many years in yeshivot in America. And so all of a sudden, I begin to drift back into the culture of when I was a young boy. And I was speaking, we were learning Don Isaac Abravanel, and I say his name often because I just love the way he writes. And I was learning Don Isaac Abravanel. I gave it to my brother to read. He reads it, and after a few months, he comes back to me and he says, Nissim, every time that I read Don Isaac Abravanel, I feel I'm a little kid. I'm at a complete awe of Judaism. I feel like I'm entering this beautiful synagogue, the place where we grew up, and I'm hearing these beautiful voices full of wisdom. That's how I feel when I read Don Isaac Abravanel. So, you know, in a sense, I think it was said by Rabbi Bouskila some time ago that we're not, you know, this is not a competition. This is Sephardi Judaism. It has beautiful colors, beautiful smells, beautiful tastes, and it's so Jewish because we draw from the tradition of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, and we continue with the tradition of our rabbis, and it's all intertwined, but our rabbis now are thousands of years old, and the Spanish that we speak is Jewish, and the Ottoman songs that we sing are Jewish. You understand? So it all of a sudden, you know, everything that we grew up with is full of wisdom. We're at an awe of our existence, our Creator, and our Torah. And I think that, you know, we have so much. I was told by Chacham Yosef Faul one time, you know, that if you were told you have a house full of jewels, full of diamonds, and somebody tells you, then under the house, there is one diamond, Ashkenazi diamond right on there. Would you destroy the house and throw all the diamonds away just for that diamond that's under the house? And of course, you know, we have all this tradition. We have all of this Torah that is so incredibly, incredibly rich, right? We have a real wealth in our tradition. So we have to go and dig and just discover it. Yes.
I want to open up one more question here, and then after the last question, and there's so many wonderful questions. Everyone, thank you so much for all your wonderful questions. This is certainly going to be the first of probably another panel, maybe perhaps next month. I'm sure Chachamim would love to join us perhaps later on to continue the conversation about Sephardic leadership. After this last question, we're going to actually have a special Ashkava memorial prayer for Chacham Bashi Zichron Levacha Nissim Ovadia, led by Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé. I will ask one more question here. There's a question here about issues of Rabbi Bouskila mentioned there's no more leaders. I fear not, at least. So who are the new leaders? Where is the next generation? Who are these people that we should be looking to for guidance? I mean, I personally would say that the three gentlemen here and Rabbi Hadar as well, who had to leave a little earlier, are certainly some of the leaders we should be looking to for guidance. Who are other people we really should be looking up to as reference points to how we can take this Sephardic identity into the next generation?
I mean, I think we have, like you said, I mean, thank you for the compliments. I think we have wonderful young leaders in synagogues around the world, very, very talented young leaders. It's a matter of them perhaps working together as best possible to try to create a unified voice. Even there is a room for diversity within unity. Unity does not mean uniformity. It doesn't mean that everybody has to think the same and observe the exact same minhag or the same tune. The Jewish people have never been known for uniformity, but we've always sought unity, including now in the Sephardic world. I think one of the real issues goes back to what I said originally. Where are these young leaders or the next generation of leaders? It's the responsibility of this generation to create them. We need to create more leadership programs. I'm very proud. I know that, the Brotherhood, the Sephardic Educational Center, we all do programs. We have programs in Israel in the summer to try to build young leaders. We take young kids to Israel, and it's not just to give them a nice tour of Israel and to give them a taste of Israel, but it's really to try to shape young leaders. Many of the young people that have graduated from our SEC programs have become involved, interested in their communities. Maybe they're still too young to become actual leaders, but I think many of them are well on their way. We have to nurture them. We have to really stay on top of that and make sure that we don't just simply sit satisfied by saying, we took a lot of kids to Israel, or we gathered rabbis in Israel in the summer, or we had a panel on Zoom. These are all wonderful, wonderful programs. I mean, it's certainly, I'm thrilled to see how active we've been as a community, much more so than in previous years on these matters. But I think where are the leaders we're looking for? I'll just say one more thing. When we talk about what kind of leadership we want, this will kind of be like my closing salvo, okay? When I think of Rabbi Uziel, when I think of Rabbi Nissim Ovadia, who's Anyo we're observing, and this entire panel is in his loving memory, the kind of leadership that we really want, the kind of spiritual leadership, and I don't mean just myself or my distinguished colleagues, but I mean the spiritual leaders that they were. I mean, they were not, synagogue rabbis. They were rabbis of, the chief rabbi of Israel. Rav Uziel was the Chacham Bashi of the Ottoman Empire, then the chief rabbi during the British Mandate, and then the chief rabbi of the, founding of the state of Israel under 3 administrations. And what characterized his leadership from his Ne'um Hachtara, from his inaugural speech in 1911 to his parting salvo 2 weeks before he died, he wrote a beautiful spiritual will. The exact same thread ran through from his opening lines as a leader, his very first time, who, when he was speaking at his inauguration, who was sitting there amongst the distinguished guests? His new partner, Rav Kook, the famous rabbi, was in the audience, and he addressed them with such respect. And what were his characteristics and those of Rabbi Nissim Ovadia? Unity, okay? They always sought unity. Non-partisan and non-political leadership, apolitical leadership. I had no idea what Rabbi Uziel's politics were on anything. I knew that he was above politics. He knew a thing or two about politics, because I don't think any rabbi could boast a curriculum vitae that would say I worked under the Ottomans, the British, and the Zionist government in 1948. I mean, so he knew a thing or two, much more than all these rabbis today who directly violate that by getting very, very involved in politics and taking political positions and political sides. A commitment to the entire community, not only one segment of it, and no self-interest. No self-interest for themselves, selfless leaders. This is what characterized these leaders of once upon a time. With great sadness, I cannot say that this is what characterizes some of the Sephardic leadership at the highest echelons of the rabbinic leadership in the in the Sephardic world today. I don't mean my colleagues on this panel. I think they all represent that. They are tireless, selfless workers who will give the shirt off their back to make sure that the community stays unified, and that's what they want. I'm talking about leaders at much higher levels who have power and influence and wear long robes and speak in the name of the Sephardic tradition, and they are very political. They don't have the interests of the whole community in mind. They're very partisan. They are very, very self-interest oriented for their own families, their own heritage, their own particular agenda. That's not Sephardic leadership. If we want to really build and generate and nurture a new generation of Sephardic leaders, we need to train them in the spirit of Rabbi Uziel and Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé, whose Anya we're observing today. That's what's needed.
Well, Rabbi Nissim, would you like to give some final thoughts on those points?
Well, there is something that strikes me when I read about individuals like Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé and other rabbis of that type of success that we see that their communities or their life seems to have rather successful outcomes. Even though Rabbi Nissim, well, you would say Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé, he was in Vienna and the community disintegrated because of the war. The same thing happens in Paris, where I'm not sure how much he disintegrated, but he has to run away. And then you'd say, well, he came to America and he's only here for a year and he passes. But it's the legacy. And some of the things that make me think about him, about other individuals like Rabbi Ben Sion Uziel, maybe like Rabbi Sion Levi in Panama, maybe like individuals of that, Rabbi Yaakov Kassin in the United States in New York for the Syrian community. And it's their devotion and their love for their people. I think that that's one thing that really stands out. I think that together with that, there is a very large vision. These are individuals that, you don't have any Nissim Elnecavé every day, but part of it is because these individuals have in their view, it's very wide, the world that they look at. And that impresses me. Hey, Don Isaac Abarbanel has this huge vision of the world, even though the Americas were not discovered for the Europeans, but they have a sense of a huge world, and they know where to guide their flock. And it seems to me that it's maybe those two factors that are maybe amongst the most important, right? It's the love of your flock, and it's the vision that you have for it. And everything else that comes with that, of course, is very important. Your common sense will be very, very important to guide you through the upheavals that everybody's going to go through. But I think that those things do stand out. Vision, love, common sense, if I can summarize it.
Chicurel?
Well, as a final thought, I think that we could resume all what we were talking about here in a single word, which is unity. Unity, and that's the goal. That's the main goal, the ultimate goal we were heading to. And I think that making each and every individual feeling part of Am Israel is it's the strategy for all us to strengthen and make stronger communities, and just not forgetting that that's our heritage. This is the heritage of Am Israel through the Sephardic communities, and that heritage is unity. That's what Rabbi Uziel and Rabbi Ovadia and all our great leaders were thinking. They were thinking about unity. They were thinking about being Obdei Hashem in unity. And I hope this generation and among us, Rabbi Bouskila is building new leaders that will understand this very important point, that all of our differences are enriching us if we could understand our unity. Bezat Hashem, I hope that this won't be the last time we all sit together and we all speak about leadership and we all share thoughts. And Bezat Hashem, this will be only the first time that we could learn from each other and we could share our wisdom, our Sephardic wisdom, and bringing all Am Israel all together to unity. Thank you very much for the invitation. It has a huge, huge honor and pleasure to join you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
We know. Thank you so much. Thank you all, Chachamim, so much for this wonderful panel. I'm just going to invite now Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé to read a special Ashkava in memory of Chacham Bashi J. Ovadia. Bechavod, Chacham.
והחוכמה מאין תימסה וזה מקום בינה אשרי אדם עשה חוכמה ואדם יפיק תבונה מראת ובך שספנת יקפלת להוזים בך נגד בני אדם היקר זכה אלוהים ובני אדם עזר כנפך יחיון עיר ויומידה של ביתך ונעלה דניך תשכם אשרי אדם ירא את עיני ומצוותיו חפץ מאוד טוב שם טוב ויאמר ויולדו מנוחה נכונה בשיבה עליונה בהמנה וחלילה מלפני שוכן מעונה וכולה כתבה לחיי העולם הבא שם תמנת ומכיסת בשיבת נפש השם הטוב, החכם השלם, ניסים בן יוסף עובדיה. רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן, המלך ורחמיו ירחם עליו. Should we read in Spanish? Y la esencia de donde es hallada y cuál este lugar de entendimiento. Bienaventurado hombre que halló ciencia y hombre que saca entendimiento, cuánto grande tu bien, que guardates a tus temientes, obrastes a los abrigantes en tu encuentra hijos de hombre. Cuánto preciado tu merced dio y hijos de hombre en sombra de tu Shekinah se abrigarán. Hartarcían de vicio de tu casa y arroyo de tus vicios les abrevarás. Bienaventurado varón temiente Adonai en sus encomendanzas involuntó mucho. Mayor fama más de aceite bueno y día de la muerte más de día de su nacer. Menuja Nejoná, holganza compuesta, en yeshiva de arriba debajo de alas de la Shejinah, en ensalzamiento de santos y limpios. Ahí sea dádiva y parte y asiente de alma de su nombre del Jajam Shalem Nissim Ben Yosef Obadiah, y espíritu de Adonai le ponga en huerto de vicio en quelar de las piedades y las perdonanzas, y así sea voluntad, y diremos amén.
Amen.
And
Thank you very much.
Hamim, thank you again so much. Thank you to Hacham Rabbi Chicurel from Mexico City, Rabbi Daniel Bouskila from the SEC in Los Angeles, Rabbi Nissim Elnecavé from the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood, and last but certainly not least, Rabbi Hadar from Temple Moses, Miami. Thank you all so much for joining us for this very special program. If you're ever interested in finding more about this wonderful Sephardic Digital Academy, please feel free to reach out. You can find more at sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. Hachamim, Hazakim Burachim, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It's Kuvim too.
Hazagamats, and thanks everybody. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Chacham. Rabbi Bouskila, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chacham Nissim and Chacham Rabbi Chicurel. Thank you. And Rabbi Hadar, b'makom shehu. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.
See you soon.